Former Republican Congressman George Santos will spend more than 7 years in prison. The judge handed down his 87-month sentence today in a New York courtroom, unfazed by Santos's apology. Santos was reportedly in tears as the judge sentenced him. He pleaded guilty last summer to charges of federal wire fraud and identity theft. That was for deceiving donors and stealing the identities of nearly a dozen people, including his own relatives, to fund his campaign. The 36-year-old was elected in 2022 to represent New York's 3rd congressional district, the wealthiest in the state. He served 11 months in Congress in 2023 until the House expelled him that December. The former congressman agreed to pay $580,000 in penalties on top of his sentence as part of his plea deal. Accused murderer Luigi Mangione pleaded not guilty to federal charges at a hearing today. Meanwhile, prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. NTD's Arlene Richards has more on why they believe Mangione's dangerous.
On Friday, Mangione pleaded not guilty on charges of murder and stalking in the federal case against him. Prosecutors on Thursday gave the Southern District of New York federal court advance notice of their intent to seek the death penalty against accused murderer Luigi Mangione. Mangione has been charged with the murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson in December 2024. The notice alleged that Mangione presents a future danger because he expressed intent to target an entire industry and rally political and social opposition to that industry by engaging in an act of lethal violence. Earlier this month, Attorney General Pam Bondi directed federal prosecutors to seek capital punishment for Mangione. In an April 1st statement, Bondi said the death of Thompson, who headed the biggest health insurer in the United States, was a premeditated, cold-blooded assassination that shocked America. The Department of Justice alleged last year that Mangione meticulously planned Thompson's murder over several months in an effort to initiate a public discussion about the healthcare industry. The department has reported that Mangione was found in a Pennsylvania restaurant with, among other things, a 9mm pistol and a sound suppressor consistent with the weapon used to kill Thompson. Mangione, a prep school and Ivy League graduate, is facing both federal and state charges. He previously pled not guilty to murder, terrorism, and other charges filed by state prosecutors in New York. If convicted in the federal case, the jury would determine in a separate phase of the trial whether or not to recommend the death penalty. Any such recommendation would need to be unanimous, and the judge would be required to impose it. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
A judge allegedly helping an illegal immigrant evade arrest in Wisconsin. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed the FBI has now arrested the judge. Patel says there's evidence that Wisconsin Judge Hannah Dugan obstructed an immigration arrest last week. He says that she misdirected federal agents away from Eduardo Flores Ruiz, who is in the courthouse. Dugan was later arrested at a courthouse on Friday morning. Court documents detailing the case were not immediately available. The deputy White House press secretary responded on X, quote, "The days of actively aiding and abetting illegal aliens invading our country are over." President Trump today signaling progress in a potential peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. In a post on Truth Social, Trump says that the two countries are, quote, very close to a deal and that most of the major points are agreed to. Meanwhile, the president is hinting at a possible meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Special envoy Steve Witkoff is in Moscow today, meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the update.
They're meeting with Putin right now as we speak, and we have a lot of things going on, and I think in the end we're going to end up with a lot of good deals.
President Trump on Friday saying Russia and Ukraine are close to reaching multiple deals, including an agreement for peace, tariff deals, and more. Special envoy Steve Witkoff is meeting Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow on Friday. Witkoff is Washington's key negotiator with Putin as Trump pushes for a deal to end the fighting. Witkoff already held 3 long meetings with the Kremlin leader. And Trump says Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has not signed a minerals deal yet. Trump made the announcement on social media on Friday, saying the deal is at least 3 weeks late. Hopefully, it will be signed immediately. Trump wants to use Ukraine's minerals as a financial guarantee for the aid the U.S. has been sending to Ukraine. He added that work on the overall peace deal between Russia and Ukraine is going smoothly. Success seems to be in the future. The president is heading to Rome on Friday for the Pope's funeral. Various international leaders are expected to be in Italy as well.
Will you be meeting with President? I'll be meeting with the Italians, yes. Your Prime Minister? No, with President Zelensky. Oh, it's possible.
This comes just one day after a Russian strike on Ukraine's capital city reportedly killed at least 12 civilians. The mayor of Kiev now says Zelensky might have to temporarily cede land to Russia in order to get peace. Former heavyweight boxer turned politician Vitaly Klitschko told the BBC that one of the scenarios is to give up territory. It's not fair, but for the peace, temporary peace, maybe it can be a solution, temporary. Klitschko is a political rival of Zelensky, and the pair have clashed publicly before. In 2023, the former boxing champion accused Zelensky of having authoritarian tendencies. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
With President Trump announcing today that Russia will keep Crimea, how much closer are we to a peace deal? This comes just days after one of Russia's most deadly strikes on Kiev since starting the war. Joining us to discuss is Josh Paul, Director of New Policy and former official with the State Department. Josh Paul, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
President Trump is pressuring Ukraine to accept a peace plan that freezes current frontline positions, meaning Russia gains territory. Now, where do things stand with the peace deal? And while the president says he's hopeful, do you think that there's a particular side that's being difficult here?
Well, I think we are in a difficult situation, of course, and have been since 2022, if not 2014. When it comes to the current plan on the table, I think President Trump has an unfortunate habit of giving away other countries' land. He, of course, did that with the Golan Heights and with Western Sahara. Now he is doing it with the Crimea Peninsula, which is Ukrainian territory. It is true that it is very hard to see how Ukraine could regain that land, but that is a matter for them to negotiate. And Ukraine has been very clear that they do not intend to, at least not at the start of negotiations, concede that point. So President Trump is essentially trying to take that off the table for Ukraine. And so I would say that, if there is a difficult one in negotiations right now, it is both Russia, who of course initiated this conflict, and America.
And moving on to Vice President J.D. Vance's comments that the U.S. would walk away from the peace negotiations if both Ukraine and Russia rejected on American terms. Do you think that that could actually happen? And is that a reasonable course of action?
So the United States certainly has an important role here as the major military power backing Ukraine. It is not the only power. I think Europe also has an important role here. It has been standing up. It must continue to stand up. Ultimately, this is a problem, of course, that is on Ukraine's doorstep. So I think J.D. Vance's comments that the U.S. would step away from negotiations, I think are notable. I think the important question is, what else does the United States stay with or step away from? Does stepping away from negotiations also mean stepping away from supporting Ukraine's military capabilities, for example? I think that's an even more important question.
And if the U.S. were to take a step back, what would the responsibility shift to European NATO countries to ensure security in the region?
Well, presumably, this is a problem that is on Europe's doorstep. I think the important thing from the European perspective is to ensure that the lesson that Russia takes away from this, whatever the final status of any negotiation with Ukraine, is that there is an enormous price to be paid for military aggression in Europe. That will be Europe's primary concern.
And I want to play a quick clip of President Trump on the Russia-Ukraine war when asked about his frustration with Putin following the latest missile strikes on Ukraine. Take a look.
I'd rather answer that question in a week. I want to see if we can have a deal. No reason to answer it now, but I won't be happy. You have no idea what pressure I'm putting on Russia. We're putting a lot of pressure.
So what do you make of that response and the real likelihood of a peace deal?
So I think, the proof is in the pudding, right? We saw President Trump says he's been putting pressure on Russia for the last few weeks, and yet, as you mentioned at the top of this segment, we saw the most deadly attack in the last since the beginning of the year on Kiev in the last couple of days, with multiple ballistic missiles and cruise missiles fired, killing many civilians. So I think the question is that pressure real, and is it going to pay off? And that's what we will see.
Mm-hmm. And now looking at the bigger picture here, if this deal fails, what risks do you see for long-term stability in Europe and for U.S. pressure abroad?
So I think what we see in Ukraine is an increasingly fragile conflict in which there is both a weariness, I think, on both sides, a significant loss of life, particularly on the Russian side, and a shift in tactics in recent weeks and months as Ukraine begins to rely more and more on drones, for example, for its defense. I think this just creates an instability across the region. We see a Europe that is rearming right now, that is investing more in its own defense, as it should be, but because of a perceived threat. And so for as long as there is that instability and increasing questions, for that matter, about the United States' commitments to Europe and to NATO under Article 5, I think that there will be that continued risk of conflict and of instability.
Josh Paul, Director of a New Policy and former State Department official, thank you very much for your insights here today.
Thank you.
Analysts are calling Russia a junior partner in the Chinese Communist Party's network of international oppression. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez breaks down how the CCP has enabled the Kremlin's war machine and extended a lifeline to the Russian economy.
The Chinese Communist Party has been propping up the socialist regime in Venezuela since 1999, and the CCP's support for the Ayatollah's regime in Iran dates back to the early stages of the Islamic Revolution in 1979. But there is one world leader that Xi Jinping has been meeting on average 5 times per year since he rose to power in 2013 for a total of 63 meetings thus far, and that is Russian President Vladimir Putin. In 2001, a year after Putin rose to power, the CCP and Russia upgraded their diplomatic ties to that of a strategic partnership. Since then, the Russian regime of Vladimir Putin has sold approximately $4 billion worth of military equipment to the socialist regime of Venezuela. In 2007, the regime of Vladimir Putin launched a full-scale cyber attack on its neighbor Estonia. And in 2008, Russia invaded its neighboring country, Georgia, taking control of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And of course, we know that in 2014, it was the first invasion of Ukraine when Russia took control of Crimea and parts of Luhansk and Donbass. And starting in 2015, the Russian regime began military operations and support to the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, as well as providing air defense systems to the regime in Iran. And of course, in 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In February of 2022, 20 days before the second Russian invasion of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin met with Xi Jinping, and both leaders signed a no-limits friendship agreement in between both nations. Since then, the trade between both nations has increased 63%. And the CCP sells to Russia around $300 million worth of dual-use components every month since the war started. These are essential components to Putin's war machine, like microchips and ball bearings that tanks and guided missiles share in common with dishwashers and cars made in China. The CCP has provided Vladimir Putin with diplomatic cover on the world stage by refusing to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, it's important to note that Russia is able to wreak havoc across the world because of the support it receives from the Chinese Communist Party. Since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Moscow has become the #1 seller of oil to the CCP, and that with those cash inflows that Moscow is receiving by selling discounted oil to China, then Russia can source dual-use components from China, like dishwashers and cars, to fuel its war machine, to give cover to its soldiers in Ukraine, to provide cover for the Iranian missile defense system, and also to sell those $4 billion of weapons equipment to the socialist regime in Venezuela. None of this would be possible without the CCP's no-limits friendship with the Russian regime. It is important to know that the next time that Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping will meet is on May 9th in Moscow during the Victory Day parade celebrations on the Red Square. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.